Wow. Thank you, choir. We have truly been blessed this Advent season, have we not, through their gifts? This morning we continue with, this time, the Gospel of John, the beginning stories in each Gospel. You're invited to stand in body or in spirit as you are inclined for the reading of the Gospel this morning. From the first chapter of John, verses 1 through 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave the power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks ahead of me, because he was before me.' From his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known." The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. I invite you to be seated. Before I get started, I want to make sure that you know that if you're unable to worship on Christmas Eve, because we have the registration requirements so we can honor distancing and such, but you're here in the sanctuary today, as you go, there are candles outside either door for you to take with you, so as you worship via the live stream with us on Christmas Eve, you too might receive the light and join in that part of the service. If you're not here with us today, if you're an extended community but you would like a candle, they will be at the Welcome Center desk through Thursday morning. So you can stop by and you can pick up whichever ones or number you might need. There, that's the announcement I needed to make sure I got out. I was on the road this week traveling, as many of you might be or getting ready to do. And I actually had a Christmas channel on the radio, expecting to hear, upbeat songs. But instead, all the quiet, peaceful ones were playing. Have you ever tried to drive? And all of a sudden it's like, silver bells, da-da-da-da-da-da. Oh, hey. So I had to turn the music off. Christmas music relaxes me. I don't know about you. It's good fodder for a nap, not while you drive. It brings peace. Peace is what we're talking about today. Only we're not just talking about the peace, the relaxation, that what helps us sort of to unwind and be still. We're talking about something richer. A peace that is born of seeing not only to our own needs, but also taking into consideration the needs of another, of others. Wanting what we have as much for ourselves as for others as they might have it. I'm going to share with us two stories today. They're very similar to kind of get at this idea that peace is born of tending not only to our own needs, but others as well. They're stories that I found in this book called Peace Tales. It was written by Margaret Reed MacDonald, and they're world folk tales to talk about. So I encourage you, when you hear the stories today, go ahead and share them with others and then talk about them and see where the conversation goes. They're very similar stories. In fact, they're the same story except with different endings. They go, between two mountains lay a narrow bridge. On each of the mountains lived a goat. Some days the goat from the western mountain would cross the bridge to graze on the eastern mountain. Some days the goat from the eastern mountain would cross the bridge to graze on the western mountain. As you might imagine, one day the goats began to cross the bridge at the same time. And they met in the middle of this very narrow bridge. When they met, neither wanted to give way. "Move off," shouted the western goat. "I am crossing the bridge." "Move yourself," bawled the eastern goat. "I am crossing the bridge here." That's my best goat imitation. As neither would retreat and neither could move forward, they stood in anger for a time. And eventually they locked horns. And they began to push. But they were so evenly matched. All they succeeded in doing was pushing each other into the water. Wet and furious, they climbed from the river and stomped off to their homes. As they did so, each one could be heard to mutter, "See what his stubbornness caused?" Stubbornness. Insistence on one's own selfish ways. Trusting in our own understanding, that kind of stubbornness that it doesn't allow for anything else to enter but what we think, always leads to conflict. At least my life experience has taught me that. I can be a little stubborn. An alternative reading of the same story goes like this. Envision that same mountain. Envision that narrow bridge crossing water between those two mountains. And the goat from the western side coming down and grazing on the eastern across the bridge. And the goat from the eastern coming across and grazing on the western. All goes well until one day, yes, they meet in the middle as they begin to cross that same bridge. "We have a problem here," said the western goat. "So it seems," said the eastern. "I don't want to back up," said the western goat. "Neither do I," said the eastern goat. Continuing, "This bridge is narrow, but perhaps we both are, if we both are very careful," added the western goat. "We could pass without falling," concluded the eastern goat. "We can try," agreed the goats. And cautiously, they squeezed past each other, being careful not to overbalance the other. And thus the goats passed peacefully and went on their way. Do you recognize the sign? We learned it for the passing of the peace, didn't we? Each of the goats could be heard to mutter as they went on their way, "What a cooperative fellow he is." Healthy relationships, friends, are built, and peace flows when we take into the consideration and see to the needs of all are met. Today we hear from the prophet Isaiah of a child being born who would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. That child was promised to establish and uphold a reign filled with justice and with righteousness from this time onward. With him, there shall be endless peace, we're told. In a few days' time, we'll celebrate the birth of Jesus again. Jesus, the light of the world, of whom John wrote, eternally present, the first word spoken at creation, light, to whom the names mentioned above, the ones I mentioned, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, Jesus, to whom all those names apply. Jesus, who offers a way of peace for us to follow. But we humans, as John reminds us, can prefer to walk a different way. Our history shows we have misunderstood that the way of peace and justice through time, we've misunderstood what that should look like. Today's Carol of Resistance, our closing hymn, points to a particular time in human history when people who claimed to walk a way of peace and justice, well, when they instead walked one of destruction that dehumanized others. Our carol today is Go Tell It on the Mountain. Marcia McPhee, whose material we've been using throughout all of Advent, described Go Tell It on the Mountain in this way. It is a part of the repertoire of Christmas songs that were created by people who endured brutal hardships as the result of African colonization and North American slavery. But though people of African descent were ripped from much of their cultural heritage, they maintained their heritage of group song, punctuated by West African rhythms and vocal stylings. Of course, the safest thing for oppressed peoples to sing, you could probably name it for yourself. The safest thing for oppressed peoples to sing was the religious beliefs that first had been forced upon them by their oppressors, but later gave hope to many in the midst of their suffering. Go Tell It on the Mountain is probably one of the best-known African-American Christmas songs. And the words seeker and watchman are thought by some to have been code words for those seeking freedom on the Underground Railroad. It was made popular by the Fisk Jubilee singers in the 19th century, who were college students themselves who had been freed from slavery. They traveled the country to raise money and awareness. They were turned away from hotels, railway waiting rooms, and even some churches because of their color. So as we sing Go Tell It on the Mountain today, and we'll sing it again later this week in at least one of our services, let us honor them. Honor all who have endured slavery and all who have continued to endure the systemic racism caused by slavery. For indeed, that Prince of Peace, whose birth we'll celebrate, calls us to break the chains of oppression. May we live as people of endless peace, setting aside any stubbornness and selfishness. making room for one another and others that we meet, seeing to the true welfare of all. For then, and only then, will we be living as people of the reign of the Prince of Peace. May it be so. Amen. We're continuing this Sunday with our statements of belief that have been written by the congregation as a way to respond to the word we've heard. The statements represent the diversity of belief and understanding in a community, our community, where all means all. All are welcome. We don't have one particular set of understandings that are required to sit and gather and be part of our life of worship and community. As with all creeds, though, sometimes there are things which we might find ourselves in disagreement. And yet, we recite them. We recite them together as a way to connect with one another, to bear with one another in love, to make room for God to work within us, to help us grow in our love for one another and for God, that we might live at peace with one another. And so I invite you to join me in our litany of belief. Your belief statements are in bold. I believe there should be no injustice or cruelty in the world, yet there is, and
I believe that I could be kinder and more aware of the feelings of others.
I believe that animals are treated unfairly, and that pets should be safe at home, and
I believe that there are humane ways for us to treat all animals and to help to find homes for animals that need a home.
I believe that injustices are manifestations of hurt, and
I believe that love will prevail.
I believe that the inequality and suppression in our world permeates even the structures of our church, and
I believe that through work, reflection, and sitting with the truth, we can change for the better.
I believe that anxiety is a heavy burden, and
I believe that faith in Jesus will lift it from me.
I believe that loneliness and isolation cause hurt and pain, and
I believe that all are children of God.
I believe above a storm, the smallest prayer can still be heard, and
I believe that for everyone that goes astray, someone will come and show the way.
We believe even when we are discouraged.
We believe that when we are discouraged, raising our voices for justice will offer us peace. I invite you to get in a comfortable position of rest. I invite you to get as quiet and still as you can. I invite you to a deep